Hello, everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss the purpose and organization of the literature review. Before we move on to the organization, let's just really quickly explain the purpose or why do we conduct a literature review. And the literature review serves multiple purposes. Number one, it provides context for your research. Okay, so you have to plant your research in that particular broader field or broader body of knowledge that it belongs. And in order to do that, in order to adequately plant it and show how it is related to other studies, to other concepts, to other elements in that particular field or niche, research niche, you're going to have to do a substantial literature review. So that's context for your research. The other reason is that it also helps you identify gaps in the current knowledge. And by gaps here, we're talking about what are the areas that were uncovered by previous researchers that is also directly relevant to your research problem. Again, your research gap is that area that has been uncovered by previous researchers and that is directly relevant to your research problem. Meaning, if you're able to fill that research gap, then you're also able to resolve your research problem. And in order for you to identify a research gap, you're going to have to also do a substantial literature review. And the last reason why it is important for you to read other literature is that it helps you refine your research questions. It provides you with better clarity, better lens for you to see the overall field that you are working in and how your research topic should go about vis a vis that field. The literature review also demonstrates that you are, as a researcher, well versed in the field, and it shows how your study builds on or if it deviates from existing literature. The primary purpose of a literature review, like I said, is to plant your paper or your research in that particular field that you would like to situate it in. Okay, and doing so requires that you summarize and critically evaluate all related research that was published in that area of interest. According to Taylor and Proctor in 2008, a good literature review should, number one, define key terms and concepts. So crucial because having a clear understanding of the specific terms and the specific concepts that you are working with allows you to also better see your research, allows you to better understand how these concepts are interrelated with each other. It allows you to see the relationships and not only the relationships that have been established by previous researches, but also any possible relationships that may not have been covered by previous researches, but that you would like to investigate in your paper. A good literature review should also provide historical background or a broader context for your research, as in you are to discuss what has been accomplished probably in that area of interest in that field of study, not only accomplished but what has been found out, basically what has been discovered in terms of the same variables or concepts that you would like to examine. And third, it should summarize the major findings of previous studies. And fourth, critically analyze the strengths and weaknesses of these studies. And that would be a great way for you to identify a possible research gap that you could build on. And lastly, a good literature review should identify research gaps and justify the need for further investigation. So, again, a good literature review gives definition for terms and concepts. Second, it provides a background or broader context for your research. Third, it summarizes the major findings of other researches. Fourth, it must analyze also the strengths and weaknesses of these studies. And fifth, it identifies necessarily the research gaps that you have culled from the literature review and that you would like to build on in your paper. In fact, in our university's template, the research gap is that last section that you provide in your review of related literature section or chapter. Now, in addition, a literature review helps you establish a theoretical framework which guides how you approach your research problem. Now, the structure of your literature review will depend on the type of study that you are conducting, whether it's a qualitative study or a quantitative study or a mixed methods research. The way you organize your review will affect how readers understand your study. And there are some general forms that we have covered in this discussion. So, but basically, a well structured literature review typically includes number one, it must have an introduction. Okay. An introduction is necessary because it introduces the topic and it outlines the scope of the review. Next to your introduction, you move on to the body. And this body is what discusses the relevant literature. And it is often organized thematically or methodologically. And I would personally advise all my research students that before they move on to jumping in and writing the literature review, it would be greatly helpful if they beforehand develop a sort of a skeleton for their chapter two or the review of the related literature. And this skeleton or this outline for all the concepts or all the ideas that they're going to discuss is a great way that will guide them while they are writing so that they can make sure that there is not one concept that has been missed out and also to really ensure the logical flow of ideas, right? You wouldn't want to read, for example, a piece that is just so jumbled in its ideas. You want to read something that is logical, is rational, and it also presents the ideas in an orderly fashion so that it's easier for you as a reader to understand it. And the last part of a well structured literature review would be the conclusion. And in that conclusion, you are expected to summarize all the key findings, identify the gaps, and outline how your research is going to address these gaps. Now, additionally, some papers would also provide a literature map. In our university, we do require a literature map, so you can put that somewhere towards the end of the literature review. Now, according to UNC's Writing Center, organizing the body thematically, okay, this means that it's according to themes, and grouping these studies by topic or theme is one of the most effective ways to write a literature review. If you're not comfortable with this method, you can organize it chronologically, as in relate to us what have the earlier studies found out and go all the way down to the most recent ones. And yet again, if you are also not comfortable with that method, then you can organize your literature review methodologically or basically grouping studies by research methods. Now, personally, for me, I like to organize my literature review according to concepts, according to themes. So, what are the general concepts? What are the different variables, perhaps, that I'm going to discuss? What are the different relationships that I would like to zoom in and examine in my study and organize my literature according to these? Because then it would be easier for me to see exactly what literature supports this relationship and what literature has not, or which relationships are basically not that much covered in previous uh, studies. But then again, at least you do have options. You're not really compelled to stick by one type of method. In qualitative research, the literature review is often more flexible, and you can say that it is more also integrated throughout the study. So you can find literature review that is woven into the introduction, some of it is in the analysis and discussion, and some of it obviously in the review of related literature chapter. And this helps you interpret findings as they emerge. So, according to Cresswell and Poth in 2017, the literature review in qualitative research often supports an emergent design, which means that theories and concepts evolve alongside the data. And this is quite different from quantitative research, which can have a little bit of a more rigid and a more structured approach to its literature review. So much, the bulk of the literature review is done under the review of related literature section of the paper. The qualitative structure isn't like that. You can put the literature review as the findings emerge. So it's not so surprising if you find the authors discussing new literature in the results and discussion section. In the quantitative section, the review, again, like I said, tends to be more formal, it tends to be more structured, and it appears early in the study, right? Like right after the introduction, most usually. And it provides a theoretical foundation for the development of hypothesis or research questions. Now, if you remember from our previous discussions, we did mention that quantitative papers are typically associated with post positivism, the post positivist worldview. And in that worldview, it is concerned with theory verification. And in order for you to be able to verify a theory or determine the findings with conclusivity. Um, it makes sense also that the literature review has to be done early on in the paper because that would inform the rest of it. Now, as the University of Wisconsin Madison points out, the literature review in quantitative research helps define variables and it determines the appropriate methods for testing the hypothesis. Lastly, we have mixed methods studies. So, the literature review in this type of studies can be complex because it has to address both qualitative and quantitative elements. A sequential exploratory study, for example, may begin with a limited review of literature. And that's because in a sequential exploratory study, the qualitative phase or the qualitative study comes first before the quantitative. And it may begin with a limited review of literature, like I said, and but it also expands as the study progresses. So, in contrast, a sequential explanatory design where the quantitative phase or study comes first may present a more comprehensive review at the beginning, okay, with further elaboration in the discussion.